Why don't we just come on in? Please, come on in. Everyone is welcome. There we go. Well, good morning. And welcome to the First Unitarian Church here in Salt Lake City. I'd like to start off our service this morning, and I don't think I've ever used him before, and that is Kahil Gibran. Now, Gibran, in my estimation, is not the spiritual guru from the Middle East, but in actuality is a bright poet who hails from Brooklyn, New York. And he's good. He said, without the notorious Brooklyn accent, "Great people have two hearts. One bleeds and the other forbears." So what does that mean? Let's try to unpackage that. Perhaps it means that we must possess two hearts and use them as interchangeably as we would our left and right hands. When friends are ill, they need us to weep with them amid fear and agony, but they also need individuals who can step aside from turmoil and be sturdy, be the rock. Our task then is to keep both hearts ready, keep both hearts on call for service to all our kin. Symbol of light and of knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. May we open our service, turning our hymn books, please, to number 346. Well, today marks an anniversary. 81 years ago that there was what is called in the annals of history Kristallnacht, Crystal Night. And there's really no celebration of this. It's just those who know, and make a recognition personally in their hearts and causes them to reflect upon this very dark chapter of the human history. I wonder how deeply the emotions run for those who did not have any of their ancestors immigrate to this country, sailing past the shadows of the Statue of Liberty. And I grew up with stories of the Holocaust as experienced by both parents, so I didn't exactly have what one would call a normal childhood. The family anecdotes about being Jewish in Germany during the Nazi era were not meant to be frightening or scary. The stories were simply delivered in a matter-of-fact tone, a sequence of events that culminated in finally arriving on American shores. Now, my father entered this country through New Orleans, but my mother came through Ellis Island in 1946, and along with thousands of others who had made the same journey, her first glimpse of America, her first impression of her new homeland, was the welcoming beacon of Lady Liberty. My mother was tired and she was poor. Her parents and her brother did not survive the Holocaust. And as she entered New York Harbor, sailing past the symbol that promised a life of freedom, a life of endless opportunities where she can begin anew, she wept uncontrollably. She was not alone in her tears. The contrast of where she had been in those dark years of Nazi persecution, contrasting that with the flame, the torch, the light of a new beginning in a new land, overwhelmed the spirit with gratitude for what was once simply unimaginable. This past August, my son-in-law from Bangladesh became an American citizen in Fairfax, Virginia. And the TV monitors in that packed, stuffy room where the ceremony took place flaunted endless images of the Statue of Liberty. It was not the same experience for him as it was for the thousands of refugees who sailed into the harbor some 75 years ago. It was different not because of the country of origin and not because it was just a television image, but because the symbol of liberty, the symbol of liberty had been tarnished. At least for me it has, being fully aware through countless stories what the symbol of liberty meant once upon a time. America is no longer a welcoming nation. The words to the sonnet written by Emma Lazarus, inscribed on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, these words address an ideal of a different America from what we know today. We are mostly familiar with the second verse, written as though Lady Liberty speaks herself. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. And the poem ends with, I'd lift my lamp beside the golden door. That gold seems to have lost its luster. The largely unfamiliar first verse has the statue refer to herself as the mother of exiles. What a term. The mother of exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Well, I think Emma Lazarus merely expressed her hope of what America could be. Now, her lineage included one great-grandfather from Germany, but most of the family arrived in America actually before the Revolutionary War, and they were part of the original 23 Portuguese Jews who settled here. And Emma Lazarus was keenly aware of the anti-Semitism that stirred in this country even through the latter half of the 19th century. And so when she wasn't writing poetry, and she filled several volumes, when she wasn't writing poetry, she was actively working on behalf of Jewish causes aimed at helping Jews overcome the loathing they were forced to endure in this country. So, when we try to connect the dots, and there are an incredible number of dots that need connecting, an American profile emerges that contradicts the hope of providing a welcoming space to the stranger. And it's not only since 2016 that Americans have resisted accepting the tired, the poor, and the homeless. A wave of xenophobia has always been part of America's DNA. But it's such a mixed bag, because our nation is also blessed by those who still insist that America means welcome. Welcome to those who need to escape the ravages of war, persecution, famine, and violence. And it is we, all of us here, joined by millions more, who keep the flame of liberty and freedom alive, wishing to extend compassion to those who seek shelter away from their homeland. Mother of exiles captures the intended dream of Emma Lazarus for our nation. And so may we keep that dream alive, ensuring that the lamp by the golden door never loses its light. Amen. About a year ago, or certainly within this past year, an astounding book called The Unwanted was published. It's a book written by Michael Dobbs, who's primarily, at least he was, a writer for the Washington Post, then retired and started to do some research and write some great books. Aside from the book before The Unwanted was A Minute Before Midnight, which was about the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's a good writer, a good researcher, a good historian. And this is what I'd like to share with you this morning. He says, we need to keep reminding ourselves that the Holocaust was not inevitable. With the benefit of hindsight and scholarship, we can now identify the various factors that led to the rise of Nazism and the genocide of the Jews. We can see the bad decisions, fecklessness, and missed opportunities all around, motivated by ideological beliefs and hate, but also by fear, greed, resentment, indifference, and wishful thinking. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in January 1933 in the midst of a serious economic depression and widespread fears of communism. Conservative elites, and you're going to appreciate this, conservative elites found his extremism and propensity for violence distasteful, but thought they could control him. He would soon eliminate their power as he transformed Germany from a democracy to a dictatorship, enabling the implementation of his vision of a racially pure nation. Over the course of the 1930s, the Nazi regime instituted laws stripping Jews of their German citizenship and removing them from all aspects of German society, its economy, government, and the media, as well as educational, social, and cultural institutions. During this period, Nazi policy regarding the Jews was to encourage emigration, but the forced impoverishment of the Jews and strong anti-Semitic views worldwide made it hard for the Jews to find places of refuge willing to accept them. In September 1939, with the invasion of Poland at the beginning of World War II, things would change dramatically. Jewish communities were targeted for exclusion, persecution, and violence in all the Nazi-occupied lands. And the surprise German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the regime started systematic mass shootings and later turned to industrialized murder by gassing. Americans could read accurate information about the Nazi persecution of German Jews as early as 1933. Front-page articles about newly inaugurated President Franklin Roosevelt and his New Deal sat next to reports of the German boycott of Jewish businesses and the burning of books by Jews and other, quote-unquote, unacceptable authors. In response to this news, some Americans held rallies and protests and started a boycott movement against stores that carried German goods. Hundreds of petitions from all over the country urged government officials to protest Nazi Germany's treatment of Jews. Yet in 1933, the United States and other nations considered diplomatic protest to be violations of Germany's national sovereignty and accepted international norms. It was not against the law for a country to attack its own citizens. Meanwhile, polls showed that Americans were consistently unwilling to expand the United States' restrictive 1924 immigration quotas to allow more immigrants to enter the country. Between 1933 and 1938, the German quota went unfulfilled. By early 1939, more than 240,000 Germans, mostly Jews, had applied for U.S. immigration visas, creating a multi-year backlog. Although Americans did not know that the Holocaust would happen, they did know that something terribly wrong was happening in Nazi Germany and that it was getting worse. Yet, save for a few courageous individuals, Americans did not take a stand. I want David to come public now, get public. When after the choir sings and you shake your head like this, does that mean it was bad as in so good, it was over the top, or?
No, you didn't see the bottom gesture. They were great. I missed the chord. You wanted to read. Oh, they were great.
Anybody notice David missing the chord? I mean, choirs, should we keep him, do you think? Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure. Good. Because usually your face is lit up, and this thing, I thought it was pretty good. I got goosebumps from that song. I thought it was good. A number of announcements, important announcements. First, this afternoon at 4 o'clock, we will hold a memorial service for Rollins Young, who was an old-timer in this church going back. He was born in 1938 when Jacob Trapp was ministry here. 4 o'clock service for Rollins Young. He never missed a Sunday while he was alive, so I'm sure you all know him. It'd be great to have him here. It's going to be a busy coffee hour for a number of reasons. One is we are making a new thrust in our capital campaign, which is really urgent. If you can imagine what this church would be like minus a boiler, it'll be tough. Although on a day like today, who needs it? So I'll remind you of this again soon. We need a boiler, we need a new floor in Elliott Hall, not because there's a little scratch, but because we could end up in the basement, where it was believed in the 50s that that's where the communists lived, in the basement of the Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City. That was really the story around town. So we don't want to fall down and meet the communists down there who are still hiding. So we set out with a very, actually a modest goal of $500,000. And we are more than 60% there. So some of you obviously have not done your, what do you call it, not even obligation, duty, commitment, but followed your necessary, I guess, duty, because nobody likes to pay for capital expenses, but it's so important. Already what we've accomplished, double pane windows throughout and all through Elliott Hall upstairs. And so that's an amazing energy-saving feature that we have already done. We have saved the pillars from the back of the church, those proud pillars facing 13th East, from totally crumbling and collapsing. So we have made great progress. Only through your help, we need to finish the job. Please, if you haven't made a pledge yet for the capital campaign, stop by the table, which is right here. In fact, it might even trip you on your way to getting coffee. An accident, of course. During coffee hour, we also have some wonderful opportunities. If you hadn't had a chance to sign up for our auction, we have some great auction dinners and things. If you missed some of them during coffee hour, please see what's available, kind of leftovers from the auction, but they're beautiful leftovers. Sign up, and it would be extremely helpful and fun if you were able to do that. I'm kind of going in chronological order, so that's Sunday. Monday, tomorrow night, we have a cabaret here, a great cabaret. The main performing artist is I was going to say Keith Richards. Keith Cricket, not Keith Richards. Keith Cricket. That's an intimate setting for you and Keith Richards. It will be in the little chapel, and there are flyers. There's still flyers available, David? Flyers available to give you an idea what it's like. It's going to be Keith, a couple of other singers, intimate setting, tables, lots of fun, and they will pass around a plate. All monies will be donated to our Sanctuary Family Fund here at the church. And so Keith is doing a wonderful, generous act, and the music's going to be great. He's a good friend of David Owens, and I'm going to be there. Hope you're going to join me. And on Wednesday at 7 o'clock, we have, right here in Elliott Hall, we have an unusual opportunity. There's a group called Combatants for Peace, and these are soldiers who actually fought both for Israel and for Palestine, coming to the brilliant realization that this is no way to settle a dispute. It could just go on for all eternity. And they put down their arms and they formed a group. This group came very close to winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And they are on tour, so to speak. They're making one trip out west, and that's to Salt Lake City. So it's indeed a privilege to host them on Wednesday night here at 7 o'clock. Combatants for Peace. Be sure to make that. And I think that's it for the announcements. The offering will now gratefully be received, a chance to greet one another and bid each other a warm good morning. Mark Twain is credited with saying, "History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes." Let me say that again. I thought it was a brilliant comment. History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. And this morning, on the anniversary of Kristallnacht, we will track many rhymes throughout history where atrocity towards other human beings failed to spark an outcry of rage or call for the protection of those mercilessly oppressed. Kristallnacht, experienced through the nights of November 9th and 10th in 1938 throughout Nazi Germany, marked a turning point in the Nazi reign when assaults on Jews took on more serious and sobering reality. It marks a time when Jews were rounded up and beaten, transported to concentration camps, separated from families, and vicious anti-Semitic policies throughout Germany were harshly set in motion. The shattered glass that was strewn throughout German streets that night, after vandalizing Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues. This glass seemed to glisten in the moonlight of the evening like crystals, thereby giving that night of terror its ironic, almost poetic name, Crystal Night. Jews suffered dispossession and indignities and unimaginable crimes against humanity. If the slim opportunity even arose, Jews had no alternative but to flee, become a refugee, leave everything behind. Essentially, it meant throwing one's fate towards a trust in others that had the good fortunes of living in a safe harbor. It meant believing that compassion would stir in the hearts of people of other lands, reviving a kind of empathy of biblical proportions, an empathy that would welcome the stranger and provide for those who were merely trying to survive, trying to live another day. Well, how well did Americans respond to the plight of people running from the horrors of Nazism? Did compassion awaken their souls so they would welcome the stranger? After Kristallnacht, even minor proposals to change our immigration laws were rejected. The rationale was an old standby. The refugees would compete for jobs with American workers. Our own citizens needed to be given first consideration. Now, I believe that most of us know the story of the SS St. Louis, the German ship that sailed from Hamburg, Germany in May 1939 to Havana, Cuba, carrying 937 passengers, almost all of them Jewish refugees. That ship has kind of become a metaphor for America's intentional neglect to expand compassion to people who were running for their lives. The exhortation to do unto others as we would have them do unto us failed miserably to penetrate the heart and conscience of Americans, too smug to believe that they could ever find themselves in a similar situation. They were fine. That's all that mattered. Now, what happened was this. The Cuban government, in a surprise, canceled the landing permits of the Jews aboard the St. Louis and refused the ship any docking privileges. They were forced then to leave Cuban waters. This was a tremendous blow to the hopes of the Jewish passengers who would really routinely stay for a while in Havana, work with American consulates to obtain visas to eventually come to this country. But not this time. And so the ship left Cuban waters and headed north to the Florida coast. But the U.S. government did not permit them to dock there either, since they did not have U.S. immigration visas and had not passed security screening. The ship was forced to return to Germany. And en route, some successful negotiations were made whereby Great Britain, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands admitted a percentage of the passengers, but not the United States. And so when the ship finally docked in Hamburg, the port which it left about a month ago, 254 passengers remained, and they were all killed in the Holocaust. The tenor in the U.S. was as follows. 4 out of 5 Americans were opposed to any expansion of immigration quotas. Less than 1 in 10 Americans favored an increase in the quota or exemptions for refugees. 4 out of 10 Americans in 1939, imagine 40% of Americans, told pollsters that Jews already had too much power in the United States. On June 2nd of that year, New York Congresswoman Carolyn O'Day pleaded with President Franklin D. Roosevelt to support the child refugee bill. FDR refused. So while the St. Louis was heading back to Europe, the House of Representatives was considering legislation to deport all undesirable aliens. The spokesman for that anti-immigration force, Senator Robert Reynolds of North Carolina, denounced the Child Refugee Initiative in a national broadcast. He argued that the admission of refugee children would mean 20,000 more boys and girls in the United States looking for jobs. He said, "Let's keep America for our boys and girls. Let's give American jobs to Americans. Let's save America for Americans. In 1941, the same senator spoke on the Senate floor about immigration. Now listen if you can hear his rhyme with today's rhetoric. This is what he spoke. I wish to say, and I say it without the lightest hesitation, that if I had my way about it at this hour, I would today build a wall about the United States so high and so secure that not a single alien or foreign refugee from any country upon the face of this earth could possibly scale or ascend it. Senator Reynolds merely added to the rhyming scheme established 100 years earlier, when nationalism, based in xenophobia and racial superiority, stimulated manifest destiny, a term coined in 1845. In 1840, American nativism led to opposition to immigration of Irish and German Catholic immigrants. The fervor for keeping America for Americans led to the formation of a new political party which went by a couple of names like the American Party and the name most familiar to us, the Know Nothing Party. Nationalism was considered a virtue, inherently illiberal, and established principles to justify wars against the native peoples in the West and in 1846 against Mexico. The Unitarian minister from Roxbury at that time, Roxbury, Massachusetts, Theodore Parker, protested this movement, declaring that, and I quote, "Our nation is a traitor to its grand idea that all men are born equal, each with the same inalienable rights." My colleagues and I have been trying to rhyme with Theodore Parker in the face of our nation's current populist movement, which aims to put America first. The anti-refugee history in this country, challenged by liberal ideals of what America actually means, has been a constant thematic repetition through the centuries, or a kind of rhyme that echoes consistently through our chambers of Congress and in the hearts of our people. By 1882, our nation passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. The legality of targeting a certain race and people from entering our country reached the Supreme Court in 1889. They ruled that if Congress considers the presence of foreigners of a different race in this country who will not assimilate with us to be dangerous to its peace and security, their exclusion is not to be stayed because at the time there are no actual hostilities with the nation of which the foreigners are subject. Now, this rhymes with a band of people from 7 predominantly Muslim nations today. The U.S. Supreme Court also held Franklin D. Roosevelt's executive order of 1942 that led to the internment of more than 100,000 Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans. Although running contrary to America's doctrine of equality, the Supreme Court cited national emergency. Now, it seems national emergency rhymes with every effort to justify locking people out of our country, regardless of the personal perils they may face. After 1924, immigrants to the United States were admitted on a system that established quotas based on national origin. It may not be surprising to hear the same rhyming scheme used today. You're going to love this. it was made clear in 1924 that 75% of immigrants to the United States must come from Nordic nations. There was this delusion, then as now, that most of our nation is basically Nordic, and therefore they can enter freely because, well, they look like us. No facts ever bore that theory out. Although the term shithole nations was not used back then, America did explicitly state its intent to exclude descendants of slave immigrants, preempting what they called an African invasion. Important to note, it was also 1924 that Congress established the U.S. Border Patrol to guard the U.S.-Mexican border and check migrants for papers authorizing their entry for purposes of employment, making deportation of illegal aliens U.S. policy for the first time in history, 1924. Let me raise one last historical rhyme that I think is especially relevant today. Nazi propagandists intentionally sowed discontent in this country using the means available at that time, which means before Facebook and Twitter. Nazis infiltrated American radio broadcasts. It was the American liberal press at that time that coined the term fake news to counter the drive to establish a new social order in this nation based on white supremacy. Fake news. Commemorating the anniversary of Crystal Night holds personal meaning for me as well as for millions of others. The family name originally, Goldschmidt. The Goldschmidts, who had existed in Berlin since the 15th century, find themselves now scattered throughout the world, in England, of course, this country, and in Argentina. Two cousins of mine, as teens, escaped to England with their parents. Their father, my uncle, was released from a concentration camp in exchange for self-deportation. But shortly after arriving in England, the teens were sent to an internment camp in Canada as enemy aliens. Now, why that happened to two Jewish kids whose dad suffered the ravages of a Nazi concentration camp remains one of those puzzles that I don't think anyone could ever figure out. But migration certainly changes the contours, texture, boundaries of a family. One of the cousins who was sent to Canada refused to resettle in England after the war and went instead to Buenos Aires, where he married a Catholic woman, and they had many, many children. And those children had many, many children. And the begats continued exponentially. And all the while, they kept the original family name. So today, there are more Latino Goldschmidts in Buenos Aires than any place in the world. And it's kind of cool, we're all related. In the United States and throughout the world, migration is a newly urgent issue. More people are displaced today than has ever been recorded. Migration has always shaped and reshaped the world for as long as human beings have lived. And the story of each migrant throughout all of time is remarkably similar. A desperate search for safety in the face of poverty, natural disasters, oppression, war, violence. They all have this dream of reaching some mythical promised land. And hope is writ large upon their faces. This is the story of humanity. It's disturbing because welcoming the stranger is rare. And we need to understand, and this is so key, and I think if this really became a concept that people can wrap their arms around, it might change things. But people need to understand that folks do not uproot themselves by choice. All this immigration, it is not by choice. They set off with the belongings they can carry, making their ways as best they can, and you know the means they use, rickety boats, strapped onto trains, squeezed into trucks, on foot. They travel alone or by caravan with their families. They pray that a better life awaits them, but fundamentally, they just need to flee to remain alive, and many never make it. Our refugee issues today are rooted in the long history of human indifference towards human suffering. We respond with neither a hint of compassion or concern. And this holds true for several of our past administrations. Now, today, we violate human rights by committing extortion with child hostages to dissuade asylum seekers. We spend $26 billion annually on immigration enforcement and detention. That doesn't even count the expenses for the wall. Now, I'm not a brilliant problem solver, but I can't help but wonder if immigration wouldn't be drastically reduced if we applied some of that money to economic development in the Northern Triangle. I mean, shouldn't we be addressing the issues that force people to immigrate in the first place? Shouldn't we be creating legal options for immigrants rather than criminalizing their migration wrought by the strongest of all human instincts, survival? You're going to criminalize their acts for surviving, this instinct to survive? Can walls really deter this instinct to survive? Now, our tiny and humble church is carrying forward an ancient biblical tradition of providing sanctuary. Now, it's funny how people tell us, and now we all hear it, that we, or Unitarian Universalism as a whole, is not really a religion because we don't follow any scripture. And yet, we don't follow any scripture, but we're the only house of worship in the whole state that provides humanitarian relief to an immigrant family. Go figure. Remove the supernatural miracles that permeate the Bible, and we are left with a humanitarian textbook for loving the stranger. I am unbelievably proud of our church's efforts to provide welcome and safety to the stranger. And the Reverend Theodore Parker from Roxbury in the 1840s, he would be proud as well. Our mission here, our purpose for existing in this mostly conservative valley is to move our society ever closer to the liberal ideals that have been established by, yes, our founding fathers. And not only is the lineage of xenophobic nationalism and white supremacy long and formidable, but the lineage of progressives insisting upon equality and justice and fairness has a long and impressive history as well. We don't lose heart because we know, we deeply know that love and compassion and equality are the only means by which our earth can be saved, by which our earth can even survive. So by lighting the chalice at every one of our services, we are reminded of our mission to provide sanctuary for those in crises, for those who seek rest for their weary spirits, and who hope that love might be found here. And so we affirm this essential part of why we gather as a church community. We offer warmth and hope and remind the world of the infinite possibilities of love. So be it. Can we conclude our service turning our hymn books, please, to number 299. As we extinguish the chalice, may we close our service with these words from the famous Unitarian educator Horace Mann. He said, "It would be a shame to die without winning some victories." Yeah. This is a reminder to us to stay active on the moral front with small and big issues alike. Horace knew that moral activists were often disappointed in their lifetimes. Therefore, we must keep faith, fight the good fight day in and day out, because it would be a shame to die without winning some victories. Amen. David, thank you. I think it's important to announce, rather an unpleasant announcement. This week, not only has my email account been hacked, but also my phone. And so I've had a number of people who thought that they heard from me, but it was only a scam, and wanted to make sure that I received the Amazon gift cards that they got for me. So I want you to be aware, if I want your help, I will tap you on the shoulder and look you in the eye. In the meantime, I don't know exactly how to undo all of this. I may need a whole new identity. I may become Goldsmith once again, so just to throw everybody off. But I will look into it. Meanwhile, just be aware that I have not sent any calls of help. This happened about a year ago this time, and our music director, David Owens, was very, very kind to buy me all sorts of things that I never asked. Well, obviously, I didn't get them. So these scams are, you need to be careful. So I just want you to realize that that is not the case in case you received a text or an email. So now let us break for coffee, conversation, a chance to please go by the Capital Campaign table, which is right here at the door as you pass by, and also take another look at some wonderful opportunities left over from the auction. Thanks so much.